Hi everyone, and welcome to another Getting Started with Canvas screencast. This time I'm going to review Canvas's modules. Canvas provides a modules tool that allows me to pull all of the elements of my course, all of my content pages and assignments and discussions and quizzes together on one page that I can then present to my students as a guide through the course. I like to think of modules as a storytelling tool where I can craft the whole story, the beginning, the flow through the content, and the end. And if I don't want to tell a linear story with a beginning, middle, and end, I can still use modules to present all of the content of the course in one place where students can see everything at a glance and gain access to every part of the course. I sometimes also think of modules as a table of contents made up of live links to every part of the course. I can create modules to reflect my teaching style, as well as the content and course objectives. If form follows function, then the way I build modules will reflect the content and the way that I want to present that content. Before I build a module, I ask myself, what are the main units of my course? How does my course flow? Is there an ideal pattern that will help students work through the course from week to week or from topic to topic? How and when do I want students to access the course content in Canvas? For example, I tend to present my content by week, and I also tend to establish a rhythm, a consistent flow of content from week to week. I give students certain activities on a consistent, repeating basis. Knowing all of that, I can use modules to help me establish this flow of information and content. To demonstrate, I'll set up a modules index page that's organized by week. I'll start by going to Modules, and I see a blank page with some instructions. I'll click on Plus Module and name my first module Week 1. Then I'll add another module and I'll name it Week 2. Take note that by default, modules are not published. And I have several module settings under each module's gear. I can edit, move, or delete my module. Now that I have some modules, I can build a module by adding content that I've already created, and I can also create new content from the module pages as I go. I do this by clicking on the plus. This is the module's add function. By default, the module's add dialog opens to assignment and lists all of the assignments I have available in the course. Using the add function, I can also add quizzes, files, content pages, discussions, text headers, links to websites, and links to external tools, like textbook sites, for example. If I realize as I go that I need something new, I can create a new document by adding it here. In this case, I want to add a new assignment, so I'll click on New Assignment. I give the assignment a name. This gives me a blank assignment shell. I can come back to this shell later and fill in all of the assignment details. If I decide this isn't what I want after all, I can remove the link to the new assignment from the modules page. Know that doing this will not remove the assignment shell that I just created. It'll only remove the link to that shell that shows up here in modules. When I added the new assignment, Canvas added the blank shell to the first assignments group at the top of the assignments index page. So if I want to remove that assignment, I'll go to the assignments index page and then I can delete the assignment. Now, back on the modules page. Because I'll organize my content by week, I want to create a flow that leads my students through the work they need to do each week. To accomplish this, the first thing I do is create a to-do list. My to-do list will include text directions, links to important content or resources, and maybe some images, like the cover of the textbook, for example. So I'll create a new content page to make my to-do list. And I'll call it Week 1 To-Do List. My to-do list includes the week's readings, presentations, activities, and graded assignments. I've also added an image of the textbook I want students to read from. Now that I have one to-do list done, I can begin to establish a rhythm for the course by using this same kind of list at the beginning of each week. I can copy this list and create a new to-do list for each week. I don't have to fill in each category every week, but the categories are there for me as a starting point. Once I have my to-do lists, I can then fill out the week's module by adding the content for each item on the to-do list to the module. I'll add any readings that are not in the textbook, and then any presentations, and I'll add activities, and then I'll add the graded assignments. If I want, I can also make use of module text headers. In this example, I can add a text header for presentations, and also one for assignments. And anytime I add something new to the module, it'll drop to the bottom of the module. I can grab that item and move it anywhere that I want in the module. Keep in mind that if a module is not published, students will not be able to see any of the content in that module. And while I can have both published and unpublished documents in a module, when I first publish my module, doing so is going to automatically publish all of the documents in the module. If that's not what I want, I can always go back and unpublish any documents that I'm not yet ready to share. If I want students to see one module at a time, I can set a release date so that the module opens just before I want students to begin working there. I do this by going to the Module Settings gear and then to Edit. And I check Lock Until, and then select a date to unlock the module. By default, when I select a date, the module will open at 12 o'clock a.m. on the day I select. The Modules tool also gives me some rules in the form of prerequisites and requirements that I can use to set up conditions that students must meet before they can move on to the next module or to the next document in a module. For example, I can lock Week 2 by adding a prerequisite to Week 2 that students must complete Week 1 before they can open anything in Week 2. So I set the prerequisite in Week 2 to be that students must complete Week 1. Once I've selected this prerequisite, then I go back to week 1 and under requirements, I define what is a student required to do to complete week 1. For each page in week 1 listed on the left, I can add a requirement listed on the right. Requirements can be as simple as viewing a page or as complex as getting a specific score on a quiz. I can add multiple requirements, and I can indicate that students must complete all of the requirements, or that they must select and complete only one of the requirements. If I choose to have students complete all of the requirements, I can also indicate that I want them to complete each requirement sequentially. Once I've defined all of the requirements for selective release, I'll be sure to update the module. Now I want to check what I've done using my test student and student view. To do this, I'll go to Settings. I'll select Student View, which now makes me the test student. And then, as the test student, I go to Modules. I see that on the right side of each page in the module, students will be able to identify the requirements. I can see that if a document or a module has a requirement or a prerequisite associated with it, I won't be able to open the document or the documents in a module until the requirement or the prerequisite to proceed has been met. When students open a document that has a requirement attached to it, they'll see simple instructions about that requirement, such as the Mark as Done button. Before leaving this overview of modules, I want to acknowledge that presenting course content in modules may affect the way that you use other parts of Canvas. For example, if you present your content pages, to-do list, reading assignments, presentations, etc., navigation is likely to be very confusing for students if you also leave Pages active in the left side nav bar. Students may not understand why they can see the same content in two different places. If students use modules, then they can see the content pages in context. But if they go to Pages, they'll see all of the same pages in a completely different order, in an alphanumeric order, without any context. This is likely to be confusing. The general rule of thumb is to hide those parts of the navigation menu that I'm not using. I can do that by going to Settings, and then to the Navigation tab. So I see I have iClicker here, and I'm not using iClicker. So I'll drag that down so that students can't see it. And if I'm using modules and I place all of my content pages in modules, then I really don't need to leave Pages in the course navigation. And the best practice would be to remove Pages from the course navigation. So I'm going to drag that down so that students can't see it. In this screencast, I've provided an overview to get you started using modules, including selective release of content by module. For more information, here is a link to a full set of module guides that are available at Canvas's Help Center.